All right, everyone, I have Jessica Murphy on, and she is a listener of the podcast. And we had been chatting on Instagram because she has an experience that she's going to share with us today that we really haven't covered as a topic on here, talking about extreme acid reflux, which we know that babies deal with. And so she's going to share with us just her experience going through it with her two babies. And I'm so excited that she is coming on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, if you hear anybody screaming in the background, just ignore it because it's dinner time here. So it's chaotic at my house, but I think we'll be okay.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so I'll get started. So my oldest son, he's 4. His name is Sawyer, and I had a pretty normal pregnancy with him. Actually, he was born a little bit early, at 37 and 4, which is not what I was expecting. I was expecting with my first to just, go to 40 weeks or to go over. I was ready for it, and he surprised us and came really early. I had a dream delivery with him. I went in, my contractions started. I got to the hospital, got my epidural. It was wonderful. There was like the doctor and the nurse and a couple other people in the room, and I pushed 3 times and he was here. So it was just like best case scenario with this baby. And we stayed 2 days in the hospital and then came home. He was born the day after Christmas, so it was a Tuesday that year, I think. Anyways, we came home, and then we noticed his acid reflux started on Saturday. Like, I know babies spit up, but he was spitting up like I was nursing. I wasn't nursing, I was pumping and feeding him a bottle, and he was just not keeping that milk down. I mean, like, the whole bottle would come back, and he wasn't crying at first really much with it, but he was just spitting the whole bottle up. He was just losing it. And so here at our pediatrician's office, when you see the doctor at the hospital, and then you go like the next day or as soon as you get out of the hospital to see the pediatrician again. Well, here you see a nurse practitioner the first time, and then you see them if they haven't gained all their weight back, or they have to have weight checks or whatever. You see the nurse practitioner until you go in for that first 1-week appointment, to start their whatever. So we were seeing the nurse practitioner that following week because this is, something's just not right. Like, I know babies spit up, but he shouldn't be spitting up like this. And he started losing weight. He was born at 6'14", and he was down to like 6'10". And then I think he finally got down to like 6'8" or 6'7", which doesn't seem like a lot, but for a little baby, that's ounces. They're expected to gain ounces, weekly. And so we had a hard time with the nurse practitioner. Nothing against her. She was wonderful, but I think it's just, you're a first-time mom and you're a first-time dad, and, you've got this baby that's crying and everything's going to be fine. Everything's okay. But we just knew something wasn't right. Like, I was like, my kid screams all the time. Like, every time he eats, he always wants to be held. And in the nighttime, he always wants to be held. Like, he is just uncomfortable. And so we saw the nurse practitioner, and he's losing weight. And so she says, here, try these, some probiotic drops, try this, try that. And she's going down through her list of things to try. And nothing was working. And he was losing weight, and it was probably like this. He was born in December, and it was in February before we could actually figure out what was going on, because I couldn't get her to understand, and then I couldn't get in to see his pediatrician. Like, it was just, you have to see this nurse practitioner. And so I remember I was at my mother-in-law's house, and bless her heart, she was helping us the best that she could. And I remember calling their office, and I was like, listen, I don't want to see her anymore. I want to see his doctor. Like, let me in to see his doctor. Something is not right. Like, he's crying so much. And so they were fine. They were fine with that. And I got in to see his doctor, and I always had to hold him. and bounce. Like we just bounce. Like that was just our thing, was just to bounce, because that was the only thing that made him okay. Like, not soothe him, but that was the only thing that helped. And we were doing that, me and my husband were doing that around the clock. And I remember going into the pediatrician's office and I was like, this is what I have to do with my kid all the time. And he screams. And I remember saying the words red face, inconsolable screaming. And he just like looked at me and he's like, those words, something's not right. Like, this is not right. Like, that got his attention. And he told me, he was like, like, if I'm a good doctor, if I can listen to you and tell you what's wrong, like I just have to pay attention and I have to know what you're saying. And so he was wonderful. And then immediately right then he called a GI doctor. He pulled out a cell phone and called GI doctor and was like, listen, I need to get them in. This is not right. This is what we're going to do. So that was like a Monday or a Tuesday, and we got in on Thursday and took him into the GI doctor, and he noticed the bouncing and he was like, do you do this all the time? And they were like, yeah. And he had us lay him down on his stomach on the table, and he would just grunt and like wiggle. And he's like, hey, that's, they're not, the babies are supposed to settle. Like when you lay them down on their belly, they're supposed to just lay down and be happy. And he just was not settling. And so he didn't think he had any type of blockage. He didn't think it was anything that severe, but he was like immediately just like, this is really bad reflux. But he also diagnosed him with a protein sensitivity, because in the process of all of this and him losing weight, my breast milk was so thin, he couldn't keep it down. So we had to switch to formula. And then when we switched to formula, we did the Enfamil AR for acid reflux. Well, there was something in that formula that he couldn't process. So on top of having acid reflux, now he has this protein sensitivity. So he was just all over the place. So he gave him a special, it's like pre-digested, soy-free, just dairy-free, just this whole super broken down formula. And I remember we came home and he had one bottle of this stuff. And he was like a different baby. I called my mom and I was like, listen, it's like, it's quiet. Like, this is crazy. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, I hope this is not just a coincidence. But then after that, of course, he did have to take medicine for his reflux until he was a year old. But he was just, he would just settle. And it was incredible, just the difference that it made, advocating for him and then finding somebody that could help him and that could listen, and feeding him that formula. And then things that we didn't know, like hold him up. You have to hold him up for so many minutes after they eat and not lay them down. And it was a lot. It was a lot.
That sounds like so frustrating too, though, feeling like you're not being heard, and then finally getting to see the pediatrician and having him just validate you, and being like, yeah, you're right.
Like, this is not what it's supposed to be like. It was. And and I don't think a lot of people really understood exactly what we were going through. I would talk to friends and I was, talking to my mom, and no one, a lot of people were saying colic, which I get. And then I even brought that up to the nurse practitioner's attention, and she was like, it was almost like she didn't want to use, like, she's like, we don't use that word. Like, we don't want to talk about colic. Like, we don't want to say that. But it was a lot of like, you're a first time mom, and, you're sleep deprived, and you're high strung, and you're this and you're that. And it's like, no, like, my baby this is not a normal child. Like, I know this is not a normal situation. And then after we had our second kid, he was just like, oh, the happiest little settled thing, and I was like, this is what a baby's supposed to be like. But it was a lot. It was a journey for sure. And we'd have to up his medicine, every time he gained weight or he grew, he would have to take more medicine for the reflux so that it wouldn't burn. And a lot of people I know don't really understand that about reflux. Like, it's not about the amount that they spit up. It's about whether they're screaming and crying and arching their back and in pain when they actually do the spitting up. That makes it more of a reflux thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then with him,
Yeah.
finding a safe sleep position, because sleeping kind of propped up a little bit was like a whole thing, because you're supposed to lay flat on their back. Well, he can't lay flat on his back. He'll spit up, or, we were first time parents afraid that he was going to spit up in the middle of the night. And this is going to be like a whole bottle and a whole thing. But we had to figure out how to elevate his crib a little bit on one end so that he was sleeping at a slant. And then if he slept at a slant, then he would slide down the slant and slide sideways. So then he'd wake up and he'd be mad. So it was like a whole journey finding that. So
yeah, it's crazy though, like just the things that we go through to figure out what's going on with our babies too, but also just when you were saying that, I would talk to other parents about it and I don't think that they understood what we were going through. Because it isn't like acid reflux definitely happens in babies. But it's not a super, super common thing to where it's normal, like
right.
spitting up, normal, yes.
Right.
Acid reflux, not. Like I think when you're saying it's not about them spitting up, it's how they do it. And so I was picturing Tula when she spits up, and normally she's just like over there smiling. And I'm like, oh, you spit
really
up. I'm like, oh, you spit up, and I like wipe it. She's never like freaked out and done it or anything like that. But I mean, it's our job as parents to like cue in to all the signals that they're giving us and to advocate for our kids and to look out for them. And it can be really hard when you don't know what's going on either. Like you don't have the answers and you're looking for somebody to give it to you, and then you're fighting to get them. But then the piece that comes, like I can't imagine like that first bottle that you gave him that made the difference. And you're like, oh my gosh, is this what normal babies are like? Like what's going on?
Exactly. Well, then riding in the car, that's another thing. We didn't go anywhere with him unless we absolutely had to for like the first 6 months of his life, because sitting him in that infant seat and him just kind of squishing down just really made his stomach hurt. And he would just scream bloody murder in the car. And we were like, okay, this is so much. Like we can't. I live in Georgia. My parents live in Alabama, and they're like 2 hours away. And driving to Alabama, I mean, you just wanted to like pull your hair out if you listen to him scream the whole way. But it was a lot. And then he just hated the car seat after that. So
yeah. Did you have to stay on that same formula then for the first year of life?
well, and yes, and it was actually wonderful. The GI doctor was fantastic. They got this formula and large size samples, just regular size can samples, and they would give them to us.
That's awesome.
If we would come and get them, they would give them to us. So we didn't have to pay for formula, which was amazing, because I looked up that formula on Amazon and it was like $40 a can. So double the price of, regular formula. And they were just giving it to us. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is awesome. That's really nice. I remember somebody else telling me that they had a similar, not an acid reflux story, but something else where they had to have a special formula for their baby, and that they had an office that would like just give them the free samples. And I'm like, that's so nice that they did that, that you can find that. So as your son's grown up, has he like had any issues at all?
No, he because that was our concern, was he was soy free and dairy free and all those things. So that was when he started eating more solid foods, that is he going to have a sensitivity, is he going to have an intolerance? And no, he's fine. He eats everything that he can possibly eat, and he'll be 5 this year. So yeah, no, he hasn't had any problems. It literally took an entire year. We saw a big difference around 6 or 8 months, where he was able to like slowly like bring his the amount of medication he was taking for it down. So it wasn't having to take as high of a dose, but it was that was another one of those things that it was like, if he doesn't have this medicine, we had it timed just right to get it into him before he had his first bottle in the morning. This is how much time you need to have it. If he has his bottle at 8, then you need to have this in him by 7 o'clock, so that it has time to work so that it works throughout the day. And then he had to do the same thing at night. So it was just constantly taking this medicine. If he'd go to a babysitter or, my mother-in-law, and she would forget and I would freak out. I feel bad now, looking back, that I would just be like, he didn't have his medicine. We're going to have to deal with this all night. We're going to have to deal with a screaming kid when he eats, when he gets home. But yeah, no, he has had no problems since then with his reflux. It does tend to be like a sibling, like a genetic thing between kids. So if one has it, the other ones will have it. They might not have it as severe, but they will have it. And my second one had it, but he maybe took medication for it for like 3 months, and then he was fine, and he didn't have as much trouble as my first did. But I'm kind of glad that it was my first baby. I couldn't imagine having a toddler and then having a second one that had severe reflux, and having to have a toddler and then have this baby, and then you're up all night, and it's just like a whole thing. Then I would probably not be pregnant with this third baby.
You would not be
I'd
having
like,
this
I'm done. This is it.
Yeah.
I can't do this again. So
That's so exciting. That you're having another one. Obviously, I love babies. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I've talked to so many people who they've had like one child be more difficult than the other, just in the birth, like in the newborn stages. And someone I know, they have 3 kids, and her oldest they just dealt with like so many issues. And she's like, I did not sleep for like the first 2 years of my life. And that's why it took them so long to like have another kid. And then I have like another friend who has 2 kids, and her first was a breeze. And then her second like rocked her world. And she's like, if every kid was like the first one, I'd have 5 more, but we're done.
Exactly.
Like, we're done.
I remember telling my husband that, because he has there's 4 of them, and there's only 2 of us. And I remember he wanted, like 4 or 5 kids. And then after we had this first one and he had so many issues, he was like, that number quickly dropped to 3, and then it dropped to 1. He was like, like, I think I might be okay, 1 and done. Right. And I was like, this is so much. Like, I don't know how people do this on a regular basis. And then, then you were humbled a little bit when I would go in to get the formula from the doctor's office, and I'm seeing all these other children that have, feeding tubes, and they have to carry the bags of food. And I'm just like, okay, my kid only has reflux. Like, this is not that bad. Like, it could be a whole lot worse. It could be a whole nother ball game. So then it brings you back down to your level,
So, I mean, obviously, like, not every baby has acid reflux, but we all have like different kids who deal with different issues. And so you had gone through all of this with your first, and then you went through something a little bit different with your second. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So first, I'll start out by saying that, I had this great, wonderful pregnancy with my first, and delivery was a breeze. And then my second, which is also a boy, the pregnancy was not hard. It wasn't hard till about halfway through. I didn't have any complications or anything. He was just a bigger baby. He was just heavy. I told my husband, I was like, I carried him around. I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. Because my first was born right before I turned 30. And then I waited 3 years. So I just had him last April. I was 33. And I was like, I don't know if this is because I'm over 30 or what. Like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. And then I went into labor with him, had started contractions. My first one, when I went into labor, I think it was like from start to finish, 12 hours. So it wasn't
for a first, that's like, you didn't have a dream first labor.
Right, exactly. And with my second, I went into labor. It was cut in half. Like, I went into labor at like 4:30 in the morning, and he was here by 1:00 that afternoon. So it was just much faster. But I did go in and get my epidural. Everything was wonderful. Well, they wanted to start me on Pitocin because my contractions had started being more sporadic. They weren't as even. They weren't getting closer together. They were, I would have one, and then 20 minutes later, I'd have another one, and then 5 minutes later. So they wanted to do me a little Pitocin to see if they could get that evened out so that I could continue to progress. So I was like, okay. So they gave me Pitocin, I think around noon. And before that, I was laying on my side. I was about 7 centimeters or so. And I was laying on my side, and I remember I started feeling it like in my right hip. And I was like, I think I'm feeling something. Like I shouldn't be feeling, I've done this before. I shouldn't be feeling anything. And so like it just kept going on. Well, that's when they gave me the Pitocin. By the time they gave me the Pitocin, I went from a 7 to a 10 in like 30 minutes. My husband walked down to the cafeteria to get some food, and he didn't have time to order his food and get back, because I called him and I was like, if you want to see the birth of your son, you better come back, because I'm like a 10. So he comes running in the room. Well, I had been telling them that they were giving me a bolster, trying to up my medicine. And I was like, I can feel this. Like I can feel all of this. And they had swapped sides on me to try to get it to kind of even out. No, it did not work. And they said I was a 10, and they said, we've already called the doctor. We can call anesthesia and get him to come back in here. But whoever gets here first is what you're going to do, because you're already a 10. By the time they give you another epidural, he's going to be here. So I was like, okay. So I was bracing myself to be able to feel all of this, to have this baby. And what they think happened is when they gave me the Pitocin, that it all kind of just happened so fast that it just metabolized that epidural. So I had him not 100% naturally, but pretty much natural. And my first was 6 pounds and 14 ounces, and this one was 8 pounds and 2 ounces. So I was like, this is a huge difference. And I told my husband and everybody, if I had to do it over again, I think I would do it the same way, because I tore with my first. I had 2 tears and like 8 stitches. So it was a whole thing.
Yeah.
I did not tear with this one. And like, I was fine. Like after everything, was out or whatever, and all the bleeding stopped, like I was fine. We went home the next day with my second one. Like had no pain. I was great. I was up walking around, it was wonderful. So that's the only difference. Now he was a great baby. He is a great baby. He's very easy. And then I guess he's 17 months. So this was last year. He was probably 6 or 8 months old. My husband would notice at night when he would hold him, he was describing it to me that he would just like turn purple and get really stiff. And I had never seen this, and he had told it to me, and then like he wasn't crying or anything. He was just doing this. And I was like, okay, like I had to see it for my eyes. Not that I didn't believe him, but I was like, I got to see this with my own eyes to know what you're talking about. And so we did Christmas early last year with my parents because we were going out of town. And I knew it was a really long day for him, and we came home and I was getting him ready for bed, and I sat him in the floor in his room, and I turned around to change his sheets in his crib really quick. And I heard a thump, and I turned back around and I was like, what is happening? And he was face down, and I thought he had just fallen over, how babies do. Well, I went over there and I rolled him over, and his eyes had rolled back in his head, and he was purple, and he was not moving, and he was stiff as a board. And I yelled for my husband to come upstairs. And by the time he got upstairs, he had like come to, and he was, normal color again, and he was moving, and he was fine. And he was like, that's what I've been telling you about. And I was like, okay. And so, but he was fine. I kept him up a little bit longer to watch him to see what was going on. And he was fine. And so he went to bed. And it wasn't something that he was doing regularly, but it really bothered me. And I mentioned it to his pediatrician, and his pediatrician was like, oh yeah, that's like a common thing in babies, and it's called holding breath syndrome. He's like, it's really scary. He's like, but as long as they're not holding their breath, basically they're holding their breath till they pass out. When they're really tired, they're mad, this is just what they do. And he goes, as long as it's not lasting over a minute, he should be, it's going to be scary, but it's going to be fine. So I was like, great. Okay, so this happened. He did it again on like a Sunday morning. We were downstairs playing and he did it. And I had never seen someone in real life pass out before this. And he passed out on the floor and he looked like he was having a seizure. He was convulsing, or he looked like he was having a seizure. And I watched the clock because it felt like forever. And it was going on 2 minutes that this is happening. And I know from being in the medical field, you don't want the brain deprived of oxygen for that long. So if he's seizing and he's not getting any, this could be a whole thing. So I called 911. My husband, it's so ironic now because he's like over here, he's the calm one. And I'm the mom that like freaks out, and he's over here like freaking out. And I'm just calm and I'm talking to 911. And they're sending an ambulance, and the paramedics got there. And, he had come back to at this point, and they checked his blood sugar, and they'd asked if he'd had a fever and had been, had a really high fever that would have caused him to seize. Does he have any reason that he would be seizing? And we were like, nope. So they gave us the option for them to drive him to the hospital, or we could drive him to the hospital. So we did. And we took him, and they admitted him to Children's and kept him overnight. Oh, let me back up here. Before this, I had called a neurologist and got him in to see a neurologist for this. And he did a neuro exam on him, and he wanted to do an EEG. So we came back and we did an EEG, but they typically want them to be asleep when they do an EEG. And I have 2 really wonderful sleepers, but they will only sleep in their beds. So getting him, they turned off the lights and all this stuff and hooked him up to the EEG, but he never would go to sleep, but they didn't see anything with him awake. So after this, they admitted him to Children's, and they kept him overnight. And so they were able to monitor him while he slept. And then he had a couple of episodes while he was there, but thankfully wasn't seizures that he was having. He was literally just holding his breath until he passes out. And so it gave me relief that he wasn't having seizures, and that they didn't, need to do MRIs, and they didn't need to check anything else. They were pretty confident that this is what he was doing. So now I have a almost 1.5-year-old that I can't, it's hard to let him cry and not reach down and grab him really quick, because he'll just sit there and he'll cry. And you can tell now when he does it, because there's a change in his cry, and he just stops and holds his breath. And then when he lets it go. Yeah. So I've got this kid that holds his breath till he passes out. And that is also a genetic thing.
That's
And
crazy.
it is crazy because it's scary, and they outgrow it by the time that they're 5. And come to find out, my dad did this when he was a baby, so I blame him for this. But it's also a sibling thing. And my oldest held his breath. He would get mad and hold his breath, but he never did it to the extent that this one is doing it. So that's another thing that I had never heard of this before. None of us had ever heard of this. And it's like, yeah, it's like apparently a very common thing with kids to hold their breath till they pass out. So I don't know, but it's wild. So
That is wild, because I just feel like at what point do you start freaking out and giving CPR and well,
and
911 because it had gone for 2 minutes, but it's like,
well, and when he holds his breath and he turns purple, and when he passes out, he is breathing when this is going on, so he's not without oxygen. So that's why I had called 911, because I thought he was without oxygen. He actually is breathing this whole time, but then when he comes to, you can hear it go and like release this whole big breath. But he is breathing when this is happening. So we just lay him down on the floor and watch him. That's all we can do. Because when he was first doing it, when he was really little, you could usually blow on his face and make him take a breath before he would pass out, or sprinkle water on his face. But now that just doesn't work. He just holds his breath and passes out.
Yeah, wild. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
That
so
would just sound so scary. I feel like I would not be the calm one at all.
that's what my mom said. She's like, she came and stayed. My husband went out of town last month, and she came and stayed with us a few days, and he was teething and had had a cold, and he was doing it like every day. He was passing out. She was just like, I don't know how you handle this. She's like, you handle this so well. And I said, I think it's because I know he's okay. And I know it's almost like he's doing this. He's just mad. He's doing this because he's mad or he doesn't feel good. Like it's almost like I get where he's coming from. But yeah, to sit there and just watch it. When the paramedics got there, when we called them the first time, watching them with my son, like that was the hard part. And that's when I cried, was watching them poke him and, take his blood sugar and all of that stuff. Cause I'm like, you're just so little. How is this even happening? And then, yeah, but now it's not a normal thing. I don't want people to think like this is just, oh, she just lets her kid pass out. It's like, it's fine. You're going to be okay over there. But it's just like, okay, let's lay him down. And my 4-year-old, he doesn't understand what's going on, but he gets over there and he's like, oh, Owen. And he like pats him on the head. And I'm like, you're breaking my heart, kid.
Yeah. And
But
your pediatrician's like, it's fine.
well, so he had never seen him do it until like this last appointment. And I told him, I was like, I was calm. And he's like, I feed off of you. He's like, you're calm. He's like, so I'm calm. He's like, yeah, it's normal because it's scary. Because I told him when he called 911, he's like, oh, I would 1,000%. He goes, I'm a pediatrician and I've seen this. He's like, but if it was my kid, he's like, I would 1,000% be calling, 911. And I'd want all the best doctors doing all the tests and all the exams. He's like, even though I know what this is, but it's different when it's your own kid. And I was like, oh yeah, it's a lot different. So I just had it in my head. I was like, we have to get him examined. I was like, because what if this is not what this is? Like, what if
Yeah.
he's having seizures and we don't get it examined and, he's, got epilepsy and we don't know it. And so,
Yeah.
and now it's just like, okay, I have a 1-year-old that just holds his breath and passes out. It's the wildest thing. So I was like, this third baby, I was like, I talked to her, it's a girl, and I'm like, can you just come out and like not do anything wild? Can you just be okay? Can you be my chill baby?
Mm-hmm.
So we will see.
I know your other two put you through the ringer. Yeah, man, that would be tough. I don't do well. I guess you go into mom mode though, like things that you think that you're going to freak out about, like you stay surprisingly calm, you know what to do. I feel like there's like something completely different that takes over you when you're in those situations. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's 100%. That's what it's crazy because I can almost feel the shift in my body when something like that happens and you're just like, okay, like this is what's happened. This is what we're going to do. Me freaking out. It's not going to do anything. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have some healthcare experience. So I think with my healthcare background too, that helps me stay calm as well.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Man. Yeah. Well, I wish you luck with your next birth and child. What month are you expecting her?
she's supposed to be here December 3rd. So hopefully
November, December, somewhere in there.
somewhere in there. Yeah, exactly. I thought that my second one was going to come. My doctor told me to come out of work early because my first one came so early, but he held on till 39 weeks. So somewhere around in there, we may have a Thanksgiving baby. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exciting. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your experience, because it's important to hear that other moms have gone through it. It's important to hear that you're not alone, or even if your kid is having certain signs or symptoms and you're like, oh, I remember that podcast where she was talking about this and she went through it. So maybe, maybe I can advocate for my kid in the same way.
Right.
So I just want to thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your stories with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, cool. I'm going to hit unrecord on